I mean, there are people in the 1980s. A lot of the armed robbers who were stealing vast amounts of cash invested it in cocaine. I was asked to invest in cocaine. It was the big upcoming drug at the time. It was getting cheaper. I refused. Most of those guys ended up in like Spain, Morocco, places like that, sunning themselves while I was still walking around London in the rain with my shotgun. So I never became involved in drugs, and I know quite a few people who got away with robberies.
It's so ingrained into our culture, from Bonnie and Clyde and Dog Day Afternoon to the Dark Knight and one battle after another, that you could be forgiven for thinking bank robberies happen all the time. It may be the most glamorous of crimes, but being a bank robber is a profession that has almost disappeared. So much so that the Crown Prosecution Service no longer even keeps track of the numbers. Well, the journalist Greg Barradale has been looking at why bank robbery has all but died out for an article for Dispatch and joins me now. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Hugo. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you with us. What made you want to look into this? Thinking of a career change?
Well, my interest in bank robbery is purely journalistic, but it stemmed from a rather bizarre piece of personal history. I'm sure everyone's got a sort of local legend or the craziest thing that happened in their town, and mine happened to be in a small Hampshire town with 2 or 3 banks, a bank robbery.
Right.
It was my second week of secondary school. You're sort of settling in, and then suddenly there's a sort of patina of fear descending, and the teachers are suddenly saying, no one can leave, there's maybe a gunman on the loose, there's been a bank robbery. And as you speak to people about it now, it's this kind of memory where people say, oh yeah, wasn't the head teacher given a shotgun to protect the school? And weren't all the teachers holding hands to protect us all? And it's just sort of faded into, I guess, nonsense.
Sort of folk memory.
Yeah, a real folk memory. And when you actually learn the truth about what happened, it's almost even crazier than that. So it was this gang from London had been going around the country back in 2007, sticking up banks in sort of provincial towns. And the Met Police had got wind of what was happening and were sort of tracking them. And then one day found, right, we think they're on their way to Chandler's Ford. By the time the villains get there and get out of their car, there are armed police from the Met waiting in the public toilets, snipers across the road. One of them holds a gun up to the G4S security guard doing the cash outside the HBC, and snipers shoot and kill 2 of them. Gosh. Getaway driver flees, and it's sort of crazy incident that I wanted to write about, and it
sparked an interest. So look, you sent freedom of information requests to police forces around the country. Just how much has bank robbery gone down?
Well, from what they've said, it seems it's declined by about 3/4 from 2010 to 2015, so in the space of 15 years. And you can sort of split that into periods. So 2010, the average police force probably is looking at about 4 bank jobs a year. By 2010, that's fallen to about 1.5, and now we're sort of less than 1 a year. And, you know, the evidence I found was that you're probably looking at a bank job every other week in the UK. It's sort of, you know, we talk about trades that are dying out, and I think it certainly fits the bill of that.
So you spoke to some former bank robbers for the piece, and they clearly didn't see themselves as being anything like normal criminals.
Yeah.
Where did the idea that they're different come from?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, and in part probably goes back to the the list of films you mentioned in your intro. Well, I hope we've all seen Heat, but the sort of the idea of this cat and mouse game with respect from the officers, grudging respect towards the sort of professionalism of the people they're trying to chase down. I think there's also the idea of, the cliche of we're here for the bank's money, not yours, the idea of a bit of a victimless crime. But actually, one of those I spoke to said, well, actually, when you started to examine that, you realise it's quite a traumatic thing for people to get caught up in.
I bet it is. Well, look, we are now joined by one of those former bank robbers who you spoke to, Noel Razor Smith. Noel, hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good to have you with us. I'm not going to ask how you got your nickname, but you grew up on Robin Hood and Dick Turpin. Did you sort of see yourself as being that kind of figure?
Yes, I did. We had this kind of romanticised version of what we were. Really, we were just criminal scumbags with a gun. But the media and the films and the stories around bank robbery sort of elevated us. And we had a bit of a code where we wouldn't shoot customers, we wouldn't rob a bank when there was just children and women in there, things like that. So, and then the police and the courts kind of reinforced that by making us special prisoners. We're all category A's, we had to be escorted everywhere we went. And so we become full of our own importance.
Wow. I mean, how do you get into a career like that? Is it something that sort of appeals to you before you know anything about it? Do you get recruited? What happens?
I actually got into it by accident. I quite liked James Cagney films when I was a kid. And when I was arrested for the first time in 1976 and jailed into a detention centre for the short, sharp shock, I met a fella in there whose brother could help me to hire a gun and go into bank robbery because we all wanted to do it. It was the glamorous crime for us kids.
Wow. Look, how many robberies do you think you took part in your life?
According to the flying squad, I've been involved in over 200.
Does that sound about right to you?
No.
You'd say more or fewer?
I'd say less,
right.
A lot less. But I was never the sort of, in a lot of them, I wasn't the leading light. I was just the gunman, the frightener.
Right. And look, you talk about making £30,000 to £50,000 from a job. How common was that? And was there this idea of the big job that means you can stop doing it forever?
Yes, always. That's what everybody sort of aspires to. But the actual fact of the matter is we were getting between 30 and 50,000 because we had a system that nobody else was using. At the time, we discovered a sort of chink in the armour of the Midland Bank and the Allied Irish Bank, and we continued to rob those, which were quite easy, as well as Thomas Cook's travel agents. Always good for cash. Did you feel any guilt about it at the time? Do you feel guilt about it looking back now? Looking back on it, obviously, at the time, no. I mean, what you have to do as an armed robber is make your victims into cardboard cutouts. They're not human. You don't think about them. And it wasn't until I was doing my life sentences for armed robbery that I'd done therapy in a prison called Grendon and realised that there were a lot of victims. And 3 years ago, my wife, I've been out of prison for 16 years now, my wife was in a post office up in Croydon when it was robbed. She was nowhere near it, but she saw it happen, and it traumatised her for about 2 years. She couldn't sleep. She was worried all the time. And that's when I realised how many victims you actually leave behind. Mm.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, is it the sort of profession where you know people who did it, who got away with it forever, who are living large now, perhaps in Spain somewhere, did get the big job, did get out of it, will never be found?
Yes. I mean, there are people in the 1980s. A lot of the armed robbers who were stealing vast amounts of cash invested it in cocaine. I was asked to invest in cocaine. It was the big upcoming drug at the time. It was getting cheaper. I refused. Most of those guys ended up in like Spain, Morocco, places like that, sunning themselves while I was still walking around London in the rain with my shotgun. So I never became involved in drugs, and I know quite a few people who got away with robberies.
Right, wow. And look, I mean, I appreciate you are long since now retired, but when you look at how the world has changed, how banks have changed, can you understand why the crime has so massively declined as it has?
Yes, it's a simple equation. There's no cash in banks anymore.
Right. Yeah, well,
everyone paid by card, debit cards, they use cash machines. Good robberies used to be supermarkets, cinemas who had take-ins there. Everyone books online. Even if you rob a security guard coming out of a bank now, whereas you were guaranteed to get at least 25 grand in the old days, now you're looking at about 2 grand and a load of receipts. It's just not worth the candle anymore.
Yeah, understood. Noel Smith, thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you. Thanks very much for your time. Greg Barradale, who wrote about this, is still with me. Greg, that thing that basically what killed off this as a crime, just the fact that we stopped using cash.
I think that's a major part of it. I mean, it's an extreme lifestyle. I think if you're regularly robbing banks, it sort of requires, it's almost an off-the-grid lifestyle. You've got to be prepared to use extreme violence. You know that there's, police officers who won't hesitate to put you down if it's you or them. And I think that risk-reward calculation changes when, you're not going to make as much money.
You've got to have something to do with 50 grand of cash if you've got it. You've got to bit by bit. It's going to, it's going to take you a long time to spend it in your local supermarket.
Exactly. And it's much harder, I think, to live off cash loan than it is now. You know, back in, I imagine, the olden days, you could pay landlords and you could pay rent and major expenses in cash, whereas I think that becomes a bit harder to do now.
I'm sure I remember reading last week that you can still pay your business rates in cash, weirdly enough. Tony gets in touch. She says, perhaps the problem is that where can you find an open bank these days in the first place if you want to rob it? Yeah, Dennis says the same. Lucky to find a bank to rob. Yeah. What's taken its place? Well,
I think you've got things like online scams, you've got things like drug dealing where, you know, you're not as much in harm's way as the criminal. The penalties are a bit less and the armed police probably aren't going to come after you as much. I think you've also got people stealing stuff. I mean, the famous theft of the gold toilet, that's many millions in one go. The Louvre heist last year. I think...
The Hatton Gardens diamond thing, for example,
Yeah, I think my theory is, you know, if you want to take down one of those big scores, it's probably stuff you're looking at more than cash now. But I think also, you know, the state of bank robbery now is in a pretty sad place. Or a happy place from a public safety perspective.
We've got to call it a happy place. Yeah. If not for Hollywood, you know, do you think we're going to miss obviously we're not going to miss banks being robbed, but we're going to miss the culture of it, do you think?
I think it's a complicated question. I think, you know, will the public miss the threat of people with masks and shotguns coming in when they're in the banks? Well, they're not in the banks anymore. But I wonder if there is... I mean, you know, criminals talk about having a code and having honour. I think that's the sort of nostalgic idea of, criminals these days just don't have the same code of ethics. But I mean, you look at some people robbing banks. There was a case in Kent where a man pretended a vape was a gun because he decided to do something that would land him in prison because he needed help. And it's sort of... Those are the cases you see coming up.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting. I mean, the last thing I wanted to ask you is when you know, there are still bank robberies, you said, but, you know, far, far fewer. Do they tend to be less glamorous and just kind of sort of quite forlorn? People wandering in with a chair leg and demanding a handful of tenors sort of thing?
I think so, yeah. And as part of those sort of information requests you mentioned from the police earlier, One Force handed over their logs and there was detail of an incident where a robber had gone up to someone who was withdrawing cash in a bank, asked them to hand the money over. The person offered them some change from the pocket and the person just apologised, walked off, called the robbery off. I think, you know, it's those quite...
You're not going to make a heat out of that, are you?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Greg Barradale, journalist, thank you very much indeed. And look, I think the last word of that should go to Noel Smith. As he said, his whole view of the crime changed after his wife was caught up in a robbery at a post office. It is a crime. It is nasty, glamour or not. Thank you very much indeed, Greg. Good to have you here. Now, look, we've been